the broken, the pure and profane, the selfish, the giver, the loser, the winner, the righteous, the sinner, all the same. And you welcome the lover, the hater, believer, the doubter, the mighty, the broken, the pure and profane, the selfish, the giver, the loser, the winner, the righteous, the sinner, all the same. Oh, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. And you love, oh, you love, you love us all the same. Oh, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all.
For sure. Yeah. We're not Baptists in here exclusively. You're allowed to sit in the front row if you want to. That's only forbidden in Catholic churches and Baptist ones. You all know what I'm saying. Yeah. Front row, that's like the buffer zone. That's right. That's right. Wow, y'all. There's a lot of people here. I thought we were going to be empty. Mm-hmm.
We're meeting here first to go to the Waffle House.
That's what it is. Somebody surprised you with this. What are we here for? We're going to go ahead and get started because the live stream started just a few minutes ago. We've got a whole production team this time, so we'll be taking questions both from online and here in the room. So be thinking through questions because tonight I don't have any plants in the audience. I'm just trusting y'all won't stare blankly at me at the end. Okay? This is my introduction to the introduction this evening. It's important that I do this because it sets the tone for the purpose of the exercise we're about to embark into. Sex is a sacred space, a space that is intended to be private. It is deeply personal, inexplicably vulnerable, and is, in my opinion, the space where the enemy is doing the greatest damage in our culture and community. We're entering into this evening into a space that is simultaneously at the invitation of our Creator, while also being a space that is intended to return to the private and exclusive knowledge of a husband and wife as these things are applied in their respective privacy. In effect, what we're experiencing when we read Song of Songs is an image of something we can hang our hats on as pure goodness, beauty, and transcendent delight in the communing of two souls who have been united by God and by their vows before Him and their witnesses to form a living and breathing image of Christ and His bride, the church. Although the details we're going to discuss tonight are genuinely present in the text, I don't want this presentation to be construed as some legalistic framework of what sex must include in order for it to be good, beautiful, and transcendent. Nowhere in this text are commands to engage in the specific ways our characters are engaging. The only command we are given in this text is simply a warning not to awaken this aspect to the human condition until you're married and ready to do so because it's so powerful. The point is that the consensual pleasure that two spouses experience is private, and it's supposed to remain that way. But that if along the way something becomes broken, or you find out it was broken to begin with and you didn't realize, that our Lord has anticipated that whole thing, and you can talk to him about it. There is no part of this world that is inaccessible to him for teaching, training, correction, or rebuke, and that includes our bedrooms. Tonight's talk is my loving attempt to make myself vulnerable on behalf of our family here. There have been too many tears, too many broken marriages, too many rapes, too many abuses, and too many Bible verses used to justify those things for me to ignore this material. There is a phenomenon that occurs when you're dealing with traumatic cases like I do, and that is you can lose your sense of proportion and start thinking that something that is actually isolated is everywhere. The problem is that I already know that. I've accounted for it, and that's not what's happening here. I'm seeing severe spousal abuse by both parties involved regularly, and I don't know how else to deal with this except to take a deep breath and jump on the live grenade that could be me putting on a microphone and just laying it all out there. It's up to you to judge my handling of this text, as usual. Far be it from me to call myself an apologist, tell you to study this book, and then have a failure of nerve when it comes to actually answering questions that need answering. So with that, we embark. Good evening. And welcome back to another semester of Rochester Christi Community Nights, where we purposely place ourselves in the gap between the Christian worldview and the secular worldview. The gap where discussions around competing ideologies happens incessantly. The gap where we question and test and pursue truth. The gap through which all of us pass who are believers and which all of you who are not believers remain. And it is in this gap that apologists like me have been called to spend the vast majority of our time during the course of our very short human experience here on earth, hence why we do community nights here locally. It's a chance to meet your friendly neighborhood apologist, listen to a major topic in theology be discussed openly and with so much transparency it's almost painful to watch, and then have a chance to grill the snot out of me at the end. And we do this because our community is hurting. People are trapped in prisons of their own making, and life in the gap is extremely unpleasant for those who are in there looking around and realizing the only rational way to respond to the mess that we find ourselves in is to just curl up into a ball and despair, which is part of why we decided to run this community night experiment initially. We here at RC observed that in our churches and coffee shops and homes were smiling folks who had spent their entire lives claiming to be whatever brand of Christianity they were, but in whose eyes betrayed that quiet and subtle despair. And so initially we started guessing what topics might aid in removing that despair, which is why our first public chats revolved around questions like, what is the Bible? How is it put together? What is truth? And how can we know it exists, etc. Massive philosophical questions with a ton of abstract reasoning involved. And then naturally the questions we received became primarily clarifying questions, also involving a ton of abstract thinking, but at a greater rate of precision, like, please explain the Trinity. Why did Jesus have to die? What exactly is it about the gospel that saves people exactly, etc.? And this stuff continued for a while until last year when the floodgates opened to case after case of a phenomenon called deconstructing Christians, which can basically be summarized as, I thought I was a Christian until I was faced with applied theology, and I came to terms with the fact that I was either under a completely false perception of what Christianity actually is this entire time, or I'm discovering that I am still a Christian, but I'm having to work through this precision theology much more slowly and painfully than I realized, because it's become inescapably personal now. Or there's a third category, a category of deconstruction that is an immediate priority. And this is the one type of deconstruction that has become so frequent in our community in particular that I can already tell what's coming based upon the look on your face before you sit down in my office. And that is, I can't trust anything coming out of anyone's mouth about Christianity because spiritual leaders placed me under the care of other spiritual leaders, and those leaders used me and abused me using the Bible that, Anna, you claim is so great. But how could it possibly be that way when they kept repeating Ephesians 5:22 while they raped me? Or how could I possibly have known that I didn't have to be obedient to a leader claiming to be an apostle when they told me that they had received a word from the Lord that I was a Jezebel spirit when I asked what happened to my tithe money? Or even worse, The silent prison that is the mind of a grown man full of suppressed memories of childhood molestations in church, who believes he can never admit they affect him because he knows that the men around him might think him weak for even bringing it to light. And now, these people can't even open a Bible, let alone read it, without reliving what was done to them. And it is this third category, deconstruction due to a genuine trauma experienced in what was supposed to be a Christian-based environment, that tonight's session is dedicated to. And in particular, sexual trauma. And it is for these men and women in this category that I am going to pause and give this disclaimer. Tonight, we are going to be doing what is functionally a giant group therapy psychoeducation session, focused on the topic of sex and guided by the book of the Bible that is the most detailed about sexuality. And we are doing this with as thorough a level of transparency that I can pull off, because the topic of sex in our culture has been monopolized by our great spiritual enemy. An enemy who has warped and lied and has gone functionally unchallenged of late on this particular subject matter. And this monopoly should never have been allowed. Sexuality belongs to Yahweh, and it always has. There is nothing outside of his purview or comfort zone. Therefore, tonight's exercise will be me voluntarily walking out that fact and seeing what happens. I am not trying to shock for effect. I am only trying to represent the reality of the text, and the reality appears that for Yahweh, he is perfectly comfortable at talking about sexual pleasure. Case in point. So, if he has determined to preserve this text, then I am determined to teach this text. Tonight is my personal protest against Satan's hold on these subjects. I'm going to go through Song of Songs, pausing at points that inform several broad sexual categories, but as you'll notice here in a minute, we won't get but 2 chapters into it before we run out of time. That's how deeply this book discusses these things. Since there is more content that I could possibly cover in only an hour, the way I have decided what topics to camp on within the realm of sexuality is based upon the questions I have received from this community in particular. And what's more is that I am only including questions that were repeated more than twice and in isolated instances, meaning that the questioner's circumstances were unrelated to the other folks asking the same question. Which means at no point during this talk or in future talks do you need to be concerned that a question you asked me in confidence will be shared in public, because the question you asked me was shared by multiple people. I have a rule when I do Q&A as well, that if I'm ever speaking off the cuff about real theologically applicable cases, like in the Q&A, that I only use examples that I have been given express permission to use, or if not, that my real life examples are from populations outside of this community to maintain your privacy. The point being that if you begin to stiffen at one of the topics I'm about to cover because you're worried that somehow I'm going to use you as a type of sermon illustration, I am 100% not going to do that. Please silently breathe a sigh of relief that you now personally have the knowledge that you are not alone in that particular question, and that at minimum, I have been asked the same thing by at least 2 other unrelated people in the course of the last 6 months. Which brings me to my second and last disclaimer of all the questions submitted in the last 6 months, combined with the Anna, quick, come over here, combined with consultations, combined with, okay, I've always been curious about this, asides. Roughly 80% have had to do with clarifying what the Bible has to say about sexuality, and not the normal expected questions, like, what are the boundaries? I was asked questions that could functionally be called questions from accidental sexual ascetics. Asceticism is the belief that bodily urges are evil in and of themselves. And I was hearing questions regarding normal and beautiful features of God's design for pleasure being framed in ascetic terms. Asceticism is not Christianity. Asceticism is abuse of God's design for you to delight and experience the positives of being embodied spirits. Our bodies are a good and meaningful part of our existence, and they were not intended to be starved of sensation. The manner in which that sensation is experienced matters immensely. But the desire for bodily pleasures is not always inherently sinful. The way sin mars and twists and abuses the parameters surrounding that desire might be. But we're not supposed to take that fact and use it to begin teaching ourselves to hate our bodies or their designed function. We are to discipline our flesh when it gets out of line, yes. But that doesn't mean that all sensation is out of line. We need to be clear on what is good and desirable and what is bad and damaging. And it is this confusion, this neglect of this topic as well as others to the point of staggering misapprehension that is roughly how topics are chosen for nights like this. I'm trying to respond to what looks like our immediate concerns of our community combined with things I suspect are going to be concerns in our community sometime in the very near future. But the reason you need to know this too is that I have an insecurity that I'm trying to be transparent about. And that insecurity revolves around accidentally forcing my preferred topics of discussion down your throats. We academics can do that, and if we're not careful, and my work in psychology as well as apologetics is used to do that, and it has been front and center both last session and this one. In case you're not a big fan of the psych stuff, I just want to make sure I say to you, I promise I'm not going to spend these times with you up here as an excuse to only ever discuss my dissertation topic material. It's possible you all couldn't care less. I don't know. I just want to make sure I say it. If you're looking for more theology, pure theology, feel free to submit more questions to that end, and it will become what we discuss up here in the near future. Okay? Okay, that's it for disclaimers. I do not want this talk to die the death of 1,000 qualifications. So we are going to dive straight in. Tonight we are talking about sex and a topic that is arguably one of the most personal things we could ever discuss as a group. I did a quick Google search when I started putting my notes together for this talk, trying to see if I could find any en masse, line-by-line analyses of Song of Songs addressing the topics we're addressing tonight, and I could find zero. It doesn't mean they aren't out there. It just means I couldn't find any. And it's that last part that I want to address first. I cannot put my finger on when precisely in the worldview changes of Christianity across the globe that we first began as a people to skip over Song of Songs. In fact, the earliest implicit restriction for accessing this material I found to be references to the old Jewish tradition of not allowing men under the age of 30 to read it unless they were already married for fear of what it might inspire in their loins. I have references to this as late as the 1600s, which honestly shocked me until I realized that I graduated from one of the most robust theological educations you can receive in the world right now. And I didn't recall any commentaries on Song of Songs at all, which made me go back to all the places I knew I should find at least something I could reference from my favorite Reformation theologians. And lo and behold, they too were silent. And it wasn't a winsome silence. It wasn't. It wasn't a constructive, oh, well, that's private, so I'll keep my commentary for one-on-one counseling sessions. It was brazen failure of nerve. And in a sudden panic attack that I had made a horrible mistake committing to talking to you all about something so deeply personal without any other theologians to lean on for help, I searched through my childhood pastor's website where he had a prolific library of 30 years of sermon material, only to realize to my horror that he had never once preached out of Song of Songs, but also that the only recording we have of him referencing that fact is one where he, to his credit, openly admits that he hasn't done it yet because he's scared of it. And that someday he'll get up the nerve to do so, but it won't be anytime soon. So, in summary, the Jews have been purposely avoiding the content since time immemorial. The patristics only reference the book periodically, and it's always in a secondary pseudo-allegorical way, which is probably why your memories of premarital counseling, if you had any premarital counseling at all, alluded to Song of Songs in this way. The Puritans were like, absolutely not, because they're Puritans. And the Reformers were like, we also don't want to do that, and we have plenty of other things to focus on right now, so we're just going to skip it. And because everything for the last 500 years of pop theology has either been regurging Reformation hang-ups, responding to 100 years of cult upstarts, or trying to mimic Billy Graham's level of success as a celebrity preacher, when it comes to readily accessible and authoritative commentary on this book, I'm at a loss, except to just take a deep breath, say a prayer, and then just hermeneutic circle this thing. Which, if I'm honest, is how I've been training you all this whole time if we want to remain healthy as students. We go to the scriptures first, we move ourselves through the circle, and only after that point do we look at what our brothers and sisters in the body of Christ have also been receiving from the Spirit through time. And since it appears there has been centuries of avoidance and neglect by the guys who are doing the most writing on theological subject matter, then what you're going to get tonight is the only thing I can offer you. Commentary from a female apologist who is also practicing clinical therapy. Meaning you're going to get an approach to commentary that is an integration of everything I know about theology and everything I know about medicine. Natural revelation combined with special revelation. So instead of a systematic theology from a pastoral perspective, you're going to get a systematic theology from a clinically therapeutic perspective. Make sense? This is not a scary thing. It's just limited because this level of analysis is only one level. We should expect that there are others, and that's probably why the patristics opted to only ever assess this book at the level of analogy. They weren't mistaken in doing that. They just were only opting for the reference at its depth that they needed for their respective sermons. And this phenomenon, the way that the scriptures are useful and helpful no matter our personal preferences or the specifics of our lives, is the entire point of teaching that the Bible is a living word. When we say living word, we don't mean living like a human lives and changes and develops and moves. What we mean by living word is that it speaks to us on every level of analysis available to the human experience. And it has always done this, and it will continue to do this all the way into the future, no matter what the world throws at it. Which is important for us to clarify in this talk, as your speaker has the very specific agenda of having you watch her subject herself to practicing exegesis in front of you to keep me accountable, for the express purpose of addressing the emergency of spiritual trauma in our specific environment. 2022, East Tennessee. Exegesis of a book that focuses on information pertaining to love and sex almost exclusively, and that the Lord has determined to give us in the form of a song. And in 2022, East Tennessee, music is a feature. And we're about to study a song about love and sex. What could be more timeless than the human phenomena of trying to mentally and emotionally process the topic of love and sex than in the form of a song? Every single era since the dawn of time has done this. There are no exceptions. Our very own, the last century, is quite possibly the greatest and most saturated era for sexually explicit content funneled through our earbuds. You may already have some favorite examples in mind. Big and Rich's Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy. Anaconda by Nicki Minaj. You Shook Me All Night Long, AC/DC. Or our very own Dolly Parton, who wrote It's All Wrong, But It's All Right about a one-night stand. The list goes on. It doesn't matter in the slightest where our personal music tastes lie. Even music with no lyrics whatsoever does not escape this phenomenon, as is demonstrated by the orchestral orgasm that is Ravel's Bolero. Even opera, in all of its exquisite and highbrow opulence, regularly features sexual content, and content that not even our most vulgar modern pieces get close to touching. Richard Strauss's German opera Salome features the climactic scene of this biblical character dancing completely naked before French kissing the bloody severed head of John the Baptist to the tune of 3 flutes and 4 clarinets, audibly describing to the audience the prolonged and greedily aggressive way that her tongue is exploring his mouth. And yet, in spite of all of this, do we also find a different way of describing the nature of modern humanity's dealing with this topic? With lyrics like this: I want to meet somebody that I can talk to. I want to meet somebody that I can make love with, not to. Bodies on bodies, like sacks upon shelves. People just using each other to make love to themselves. We all use our bodies for a place to hide. We meet all the other bodies with people hiding inside. And if all that is touching is just what you wear, then I guess that not sharing is the only thing that we share. Somewhere, we lost true love, somewhere along the line. And it is in this way that we are reminded that there are a great deal more things at play in the topic of love and sex than the mere animal thirsting and grinding of organs scratching an itch. A timeless reminder. And when we speak of timelessness, it's only natural that we defer to the timeless one from whom these things were authored. Please turn in your Bibles to Song of Songs with me. The greatest love song that has ever been written concerning love and sex. The first thing I want you to notice is that there is no warning or command not to read this material based upon age or marital status. There are no giant triple XXXs, No blacked out pages with warnings about adult content, and no disclaimers. Remember, you're hearing a ton from Anna tonight, so you're going to have to weigh my words against other Christian teachers throughout history here and make your own judgments, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to conclude from this observation that if the Lord himself has seen fit to preserve within his word this book, and he has also seen fit to teach that the entirety of his revelation is good and profitable for the edification of his church, then for us to pretend like there are sections of Scripture that are not this way due to our personal discomfort with the content is a massive disservice to the text. And massive disservices to the text lead to massive cultural misapprehensions. So if the Lord has not restricted this information based upon age or marital status, I will also not restrict due to age or marital status. Love and sex is a topic that is important for everyone, no matter their circumstances, it would seem. Let's just read the beginning for a moment. I'm reading out of a New English translation with full translation notes in front of me for my atheists in the room right now and watching online. And that's due to the fact that it was translated with both translation philosophies simultaneously. Here we go. Solomon's most excellent love song, her to him. Oh, how I wish you would kiss me passionately, for your lovemaking is more delightful than wine. The fragrance of your cologne is delightful. Your name is like the finest perfume. No wonder the young women adore you. Draw me after you. Let us hurry. May the king bring me into his bedroom chambers. The chorus to the man. We will rejoice and delight in you. We will praise your love more than wine. Her to him. How rightly the young women adore you. Her to the choir. I am dark but lovely, O maidens of Jerusalem, dark like the tents of Kedar, lovely like their tent curtains, the tent curtains of Salma. Do not stare at me because I am dark, for the sun has burned my skin. My brothers were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards. Alas, my own vineyard I could not keep. Her to him. Tell me, O you whom my heart loves, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you rest your head during the midday heat? Tell me, lest I wander around beside the flocks of your companions. Him to her. If you do not know, O most beautiful of women, simply follow the tracks of my flock and pasture your little lambs beside the tents of the shepherds. Him to her. O my beloved, you are like a mare among Pharaoh's stallions. Your cheeks are beautiful with ornaments. Your neck is lovely with strings of jewels. We will make for you gold ornaments studded with silver. She replies, while the king was at his banqueting table, my nard gave forth its fragrance. My beloved is like a fragrant pouch of myrrh spending the night between my breasts. My beloved is like a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. Him to her. Oh, how beautiful you are, my beloved. Oh, how beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves. She responds, oh, how handsome you are, my lover. Oh, how delightful you are. The lush foliage is our canopied bed. The cedars are the beams of our bedroom chamber. The pines are the rafters of our bedroom. Her to him. I am a meadow flower. From Sharon, a lily from the valleys. He replies, like a lily among the thorns is my darling among the maidens. Her responds, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Her to us. He brought me into the banquet hall, and he looked at me lovingly, sustained me with raisin cakes, refreshed me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. Her to the choir. I admonish you, O maidens of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and by the young does of the open fields, do not awaken or arouse love until it pleases. That's where I'm going to stop. Contextually speaking, Song of Songs is an ancient love poem. Besides the obvious structure of the book looking this way, we also know from the type of story the book tells. There are players and there are parts. The main character, a woman called the Beloved, and her male counterpart, the Lover, followed by a chorus made up of maidens. There's also the breaking of the fourth wall, as the players address the reader by describing to the reader information they need in order to understand the descriptions our lovers and chorus are making. These are important facets because there are so many double entendres in the grammar and metaphors that if you're reading too quickly, you may miss them. The point of this text, it seems, is to attempt to put into words what few of us can, namely the transcendent nature of sexual desire and the course that sexual desire takes in all human beings when indulged. We will get to this shortly. A lot of our literary analysis for this book is difficult because there really is very little out there like it. We have copies of ancient love poetry that look similarly, but nothing that even holds a candle to the outright exuberance and detail this text takes in outlining what happens emotionally, physiologically, and mentally during the course of the initial all-consuming desperate euphoria of longing for consummation with one's lover in the moments before and immediately after they become a spouse. This text leaves no angle uninvestigated here, and although this poem definitely takes the cake by way of detail, we can glean from history certain contextual keys that can help us understand how the original audience would have received this information. Take, for example, the fact that we find out later into the text that our main character is Egyptian, and Egyptian love poetry has content that is extremely similar. Let me show you just one such papyrus in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. Would that you come to your beloved swiftly as the king's horse, thoroughbred amongst all steeds, the champion of the stable, cosseted in its feed, whose sovereign recognizes its pace. Hearing the cracking of a whip, it cannot be held back. No warrior can subdue it. How knowing is the heart of the beloved that he is not far from his beloved. The ancients, it would seem, also like to communicate the details of intimacy between lovers through song. And the original audience would have understood this well in the sense that the other songs available for them to peruse were helpful, certainly, but that this text was the epitome of the phenomenon. The Song of Songs, akin to saying Holy of Holies, was a way of explaining to the audience that this was the end-all of what can be said of such things. That we have arrived at the penultimate place of understanding, and the text does not disappoint us to that end. The verses we read give us a vivid depiction of the woman's initial articulation for her longing for the wedding night, what she expects she'll experience, how she wants that experience to happen, and then how her lover obliges her. As far as our hermeneutic circle is concerned, this content is case in point, an example of why studying the grammar of the text really matters. As far as our hermeneutic circle is concerned, the fact that the main character is female and the vast majority of the content is focused on the female side of the equation should not be missed. I have said this before in talks in here, and I'm going to say it again. The Bible is the most pro-feminine and pro-feminist text in the world, and this is case in point. We begin with a repeated description of foreplay involving the erogenous zones of the human body. The opening verses of the text are to be understood in summary as the woman begging the man to consume her body in such a way as to author in her the unfettered desire to be his willing slave. The Hebrew understanding of the phrase we translate as "kiss me with the kisses of your mouth" or "kiss me passionately" is significantly more involved than mere kissing. What she is begging for is kisses with intent, kisses that begin the physiological override process of the human body that leads to orgasm. Her request is for her lover to arouse her orally. This means in order for us to understand what she is asking him to author, we need a knowledge of how both male and female anatomy responds to different stimuli. We also need to have a knowledge of how oral arousal occurs. Erogenous zones are areas of the human body with heightened sensitivity that, when stimulated, generate increased blood flow to the erectile tissues that are needed to achieve an orgasm. The sensitivity of each zone is contingent on the individual, but in general, the list includes the mouth, the neck, ears, navel, the skin under the arms, in particular the armpits for some, the scalp, fingertips in general, and the skin behind the knee. There can be others, and no spot is universal, save for the most important erogenous zone, the brain. All orgasms are controlled by this erogenous zone, and we have very real clinical cases of people who have completely normal physiology and who, through practice, can think themselves to orgasm on command. Which means, single people out there listening, not only is Song of Songs important for you to master as a single person, but that the experiences described therein are not completely out of the realm of possibility for you to experience, even if you're called to singleness for the whole of your life. A knowledge of arousal between spouses is not a mean tease. It's a meditation on the embodied and sexual design innate to our existence as humans. Since orgasmic achievement can be self-derived, this knowledge is critical to all humans, which of course brings us to the final and most obvious erogenous zone, being the genitals. Both men and women possess erectile tissue, as both men and women possess identical sexual tissue types. Let me show you. In human development, both male and female infants begin identically. Did you know this? And it's only after our initial hormone shifts inside of our mother's uterus that when those occur, that the sexual tissues begin to appear outwardly differently. But they're the same. The point is, in both parties, the tissues involved with sexual arousal and successful orgasm are exactly the same, which means if you can navigate your own tissues, then the tissues of your partner, even though you have no previous practical experience with them, will not be a mystery. This means that you actually have to have attempted to navigate your own tissues in order to understand them. And this is a crucial contextual point. Our characters in this text are established as virgins, both in the grammar as well as more robustly through hermeneutics. I don't care what you read on the internet. And yet, our protagonist knows with distinction what to ask for. How does she know that? How precisely does one tell their lover what they would like to be done to them if we don't even know what we want? Which brings us to the topic of masturbation and self-exploration. Deep breaths, everybody. For whatever reason, somewhere, it's okay, you can breathe, you're okay. For whatever reason, somewhere along the line, we got in our heads that the Bible teaches that we should view our vulvas and penises as shameful and sinful in and of themselves. This could not be further from the truth, and I suspect that this belief is the primary undercurrent through which the enemy has coerced us into the highest pornography rates on record. We will get to that in a minute. Neither Song of Songs nor any other book of the Bible teaches that masturbation in and of itself is sinful. If your mind immediately jumps to the story of Onan in Genesis as an objection, please know I've dealt with that passage ad infinitum in a previous lecture, and that story is not about ejaculating in general. It's about obedience. My point being that masturbation is not a sin. What we think about while we masturbate might be a sin. But the act of bringing oneself to climax and experiencing an orgasm in and of itself is not a forbidden act, and in a great deal of ways, when done correctly, can relieve a lot of the tensions that occur during the course of normal human sexual development and maturity. Horniness, for example, is a normal bodily urge for both men and women. It, just like hunger, is an urge that is physiologically derived and often involuntary. And it, just like disciplining hunger through diet and fasting, can be disciplined as well. The woman in Song of Songs makes note of how she longs for her lover who is unique among men. Not only does she tell the reader that she does not want to be among the other shepherds, but only specifically him in the opening verses, but also that he alone has demonstrated a sexual competency that is unique amongst the other young men. She says, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. We'll get to the taste of his fruit shortly, but for now, the point is that this man was an extremely wise young man who had heeded all of the ancient wisdom passed down to him, both scripturally and elsewhere in his studies. Apple trees in the ancient Near East were not native. To find an apple tree in the forest would have been a sight to behold. You can laugh at that. That's funny. It's okay. That's hilarious. 8th century BC. Gold diggers, man, you can't get away from them. Apple trees had to be cultivated and immaculately cared for. There was an extremely high level of management of foliage, both for external health of the tree, but also internally, in order to thrive and successfully produce apples. The level of discipline this man must have possessed in order to be described in this way, in comparison to the way the other young men behave sexually, must have been extraordinarily masterful to be labeled in such a way. Don't miss that. We'll find out. Not only was she fully aware that she could ask for what she wanted, and he wouldn't be confused by the request, And based on his response, he was not confused in the slightest and was already planning on it, he says. But she was also aware that he knew how to control himself. How to control himself in his internal disciplines prior to this climactic sexual experience. Meaning, he had also made a study of lovemaking while simultaneously controlling his own urges waiting for her. As I said before, the primary erogenous zone for both men and women is the brain. And as a studying clinician, I can tell you that the primary driving force behind a broken and failing sex life is a brain that has been marred by sin. Either sin was inflicted upon ourselves that we are now unwittingly addicted to, or sin that others inflicted upon us that we are afraid to understand fully because when we think about it, all we feel is shame and fear and a desire to suppress and hide. And it's in this self-imposed prison that we erect in our heads as a result of these sins that then in turn make it completely impossible to experience any of the things described in Song of Songs. One such example is having multiple sexual partners. There have been several monogamy studies done on the brain, and I'm certain there will be many more as the polyamory movement gears up for its soon-to-be normalized day in the sun. But as hard as they try, the results are always the same. Monogamous people's brains light up more than non-monogamous people. They also light up in the same way that animal researchers documenting monogamy in prairie voles, for example, light up showing better distributions and densities of oxytocin, vasopressin, and dopamine. Our CNM poly friends, and that stands for, get used to this, consensual non-monogamy and polyamory, can appeal to whatever they'd like. But the phrase, humans aren't designed to be monogamous, is, and I'm going to be completely blunt here, complete drivel. Another example of this imprisoning drivel is using pornography. The number one reported confession from church leadership willing to be upfront about the sins that they struggle with, bar none, is pornography usage. Pornography being one of the most potent psychological addictions in the world, it reroutes the brain's natural response to stimuli into so high a response that it actually erodes your prefrontal cortex. Ever heard this in a pornography talk? Just wait. Porn also erodes your brain's ability to achieve an erection or an orgasm with a partner in real life. Your brain is designed to respond to sexual stimulation with surges of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that acts as a programming device for your memory. When something positive occurs, like you eat food when you're hungry, your brain will tie that dopamine release to the memory of where the food came from so that when that normal bodily urge happens again, you can go and retrieve more food with less expenditure of mental energy. This part of where you get those random cravings for like specific foods, that's where that comes from. The same is true for the memory of the sources of our orgasms. This means that when sexual desire occurs involuntarily, your brain will crave wherever the last source of the orgasm came from. If the stimulant came from porn, congratulations, your brain is now addicted to porn and will seek to reward you with dopamine if you give it what it's craving. This memory tied to reward anticipation is a part of our brain's plasticity or ability to continue learning. Pornography satisfies every one of the prerequisites for neuroplastic change. When pornographers boast that they are pushing the envelope by introducing new, harder themes, what they don't say to you is that they must, because their customers are building up a tolerance to the content and they won't keep paying unless they do. Meaning that pornographic images result in abnormally high levels of dopamine. Abnormally high levels of dopamine have correlated to the erosion of your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for controlling willpower, morality, impulse control, and inhibition. The more pornography you consume, the more your prefrontal cortex erodes, and the more intense the pornographic images need to become to give you the dopamine levels your brain is craving. This is why pornography users begin describing their experiences as simultaneously hating the experience while still seeking it, while reporting higher levels of anxiety and depression, and ultimately the inability to feel any sort of sexual pleasure during the masturbation session whatsoever. What is more is that the region of the brain that is activated during pornography consumption is the exact same part of the brain that is activated when you are actually having sex. And there is a mirror mechanism that is automatically influenced by what we perceive, which may explain why there appears to be a correlation between the increases of actual reported cases of rape, incest, and pedophilia in the real world, while Pornhub is reporting that the increase of views of pornography featuring violent rape, incest, and underage partners increasing exponentially. To summarize, and I am saying this because I love you, moms and dads, stop giving your young men porn because you're of the belief that it is better for them to be relieving their horniness to a woman in a magazine as opposed to knocking up their girlfriend before you think they're ready to settle down and get serious. What you're doing is inadvertently handing them something that is as addicting as heroin, authoring a debilitating sex life from which derives everything from the inability to feel pleasure or enjoy one's future spouse, all the way to teaching them that personal gratification is the only reason the woman is present in the act. And to take it a step further, why are we implying to our young men that getting married young and having babies is something negative? The scriptures say repeatedly to delight in the wife of your youth and that babies are a blessing. So why are we sending our young men mixed signals here? Why are we handing them porn instead of teaching them how to relieve their horniness while they train their minds in discipline to prepare for the sexual competency that will author in their marriage beds incredible orgasms and tons of grandchildren for us to rejoice over? Why are we treating sex as though it's some uncontrollable urge that they couldn't possibly discipline, instead of pointing at sex as the gift of relief, relaxation, and pure delight for the men and women who have taken up the mantle of vowing their lives in service to another person until death comes for them? Because that's what sex is. It's the delightful thing you look forward to as two people who are laboring to lay a firm foundation, the stones of our civilization. Why are we handing our sons condoms while simultaneously telling them to wait for marriage? As a community, we have to put an end to that nonsense. There's nothing biblical here. When we as parents are handing our children pure unadulterated sin in lieu of having to have an awkward conversation or being really real about the consequences of our actions, we have no business acting surprised when they turn around in adulthood, point at us as hypocrites, and then walk away from Christianity. I'm going to stop there because I might actually start preaching. Can you tell I get a little bit worked up about that one? Yeah. Which brings us back to the overall discussion on masturbation. Usually masturbation is coupled with some sort of pornographic act, either overtly or mentally. That mars the entire experience, which I suspect is where a lot of the discomfort and silent shame comes from when this topic is broached. We don't know really how to handle it ourselves, and so that discomfort trickles down to our young people, generation to generation. And the thing that is telling about this is that the stories I hear in my offices about the average first encounter a young person has with their genitals in an arousing sort of way doesn't involve pornographic thoughts or usage whatsoever. They were able to play and explore themselves to the point of achieving orgasm simply based on how pleasured they felt, without any visual or mentally erotic images whatsoever. And this is really important, so don't miss this. That means that the idea that there needs to be a sexual object involved, your phone, a Playboy, Google Images, you name it, in successfully achieving a satisfying orgasm is a lie. A lie we need to stop believing. If it's not from God, then it's from the enemy. Do not listen to the enemy, no matter how convincing. It's a lie. What we need is to study this text at length, to remind ourselves that the realm of eroticism belongs to Yahweh. He is the one who designed it in us to begin with. He is the one who dictates its boundaries, because it is inside of those boundaries where we actually get to feel delight. A delight that does not end with an immediate downward spiral into shame and disgust with ourselves. What I am getting at here is that the cure for pornography addiction is quite literally Bible study. And that is not me trying to sound pious. If you have circuits in your brain that are a direct result of exposure to pornography and you would like them replaced, that can be arranged. Come and talk to me and I will show you how to do that. It will take time, but it can be done. What you do is, instead of trying to white knuckle yourself through moments where your brain is demanding its fix, is that you force it to fixate instead on healthy eroticism in here. to get you through the difficult parts. And then when everything settles down, begin building an entirely new circuit using the original techniques your body craves if you had never been exposed in the first place. You don't just ignore the unwanted thought. You replace it with something better, Scripture. And you don't masturbate less. You do it more with this. There's more to this. I don't have time to go any deeper here, but for those of you sitting there in a mental prison of self-imposed feelings of disgrace, I want you to hear my voice in your head saying, you absolutely can be free of this if you want to be. And it doesn't have to be completely miserable or some weird torturous sexual asceticism that does it. The cure for sexual brokenness, as with all human brokenness, is not to run away from our Creator. It's to run toward Him. He wants you to be free. Trust Him. If that means that your Bible study is in Song of Songs exclusively for the next long while, so be it. If it means that you are sitting there listening to this talk and you're thinking, my marriage bed hasn't even been remotely inviting for as long as I can remember, then you as well should consider spending your days becoming an expert lover of biblical proportion. You see, Bible study can be fun and practical. But in order to know what the beloved is asking for and how the lover responds as you move through your studies, and ladies, this matters immensely for you as well, you have to have a knowledge of the Creator's design. So let's do a quick run through to get you started. What you are seeing right now is a breakdown of the differing erectile tissues in both men and women, broken down by their equivalencies. I brought models from my office as well. What you feel when you touch your respective areas roughly correlates to the same feeling the opposite sex would experience, which means that each tissue type possesses differing characteristics and differing sensitivities over the course of the building of an orgasm. Don't like to be overstimulated in certain areas? Then in all likelihood, neither do they. This is an important skill and knowledge to have when taking care of oneself and one's spouse. If you do not know yourself well enough to know what good touch and bad touch feels like for you, then you are forcing your spouse to guess while trying to take care of you, which means you need to be patient with them as you would with yourself as they learn. Give them time and do not lie to them. They cannot read your mind, and bearing false witness is a sin anyway. Tell the truth about what you are feeling. Sex is for both parties' delight. The Scriptures are extremely clear that the nature of sex as an action is that it is pure service. Sex is always to be a 100% giving endeavor. In the same way, marriage is 100% a giving endeavor. Both spouses are to give 100%. And in that design, both spouses are fully taken care of. And when one spouse is unable to give fully, the other spouse embodies and reflects Christ in that he gives 100% when we cannot or do not return it. And so no matter where you are either reflecting in your actions toward your spouse the way things ought to be, or you are mimicking the Savior when things are not the way they ought to be. And therefore, in all things and on every occasion, it is the Christian understanding of the relations between the sexes that places the onus of service-oriented behavior toward our spouses on us, and completely independent of the actions of those who share our beds, which means sex cannot be leveraged for anything if we believe this book. Which means our spouses can never be treated as a receptacle for our gratification if we believe this book. Which means that we must have an honest look at the details of our sex lives when things begin falling apart in our marriages. And in order to do that, we need to be able to compare our personal actions and intentions in seeking out the sexual experience to be able to know if we're abusing this human phenomenon. Okay? All right, so this is a vulva. I'm going to focus on the female side of this equation in this talk, not because the penis isn't equally important, but rather because navigating the vulva appears to be a significant issue based upon what I'm hearing. Multiple times in Song of Songs, the beloved calls attention to her nature being floral and describing the vulva. I'm just doing my job. So your questions. In this way is an ancient metaphor. The vulva is delicate and has only recently been studied at any great depth anatomically. So much so, in fact, that it wasn't until my lifetime that a complete map of the clitoris was even made. For a very long time, anatomy and physiology texts would only reference it in passing as a single spot of highly focused nerve endings. So like back in school, you'd see it. It was that like zebra-striped thing that nobody wanted to ask about. Yeah, you remember that? We now know it's an entire nerve system that extends around the vaginal opening and all the way back toward the rectum, which is why many women would report differing locations for what is known as the G-spot, as well as the ability to achieve climax when penetrated anally. Which brings us to the topic of anal sex. Is anal sex forbidden in the scriptures? No, it's not. The manner in which you engage in anal sex matters, though. That being said, spouses are completely free to engage in whatever play brings them both pleasure, so long as it is service-oriented and consensual. But be forewarned on this one. The rectum was not designed to be an entranceway. Just because something can be pleasurable does not mean that it was necessarily designed for that function. And when you use things that were not designed for those functions, the sacred privacy you were enjoying may very rapidly become no longer private because an emergency room visit is necessary. If you are not very careful, and if you do not warm up that sphincter in such a way that it opens for you naturally, meaning you did not force it open, you can tear and damage it, and there is no way for us to repair that damage right now. Which means that if you're cavalier about this with your spouse, you can make them incontinent for the remainder of their days. Sex should never be painful. Pain means that tissue is being damaged. Pain tells you to stop and reassess. There are things that every clinician knows to look for based upon lifestyles that regularly engage in anal sex. And chief among them is, please help me, I'm leaking fecal matter on a regular basis. And we have to tell them, sorry, that's what happens when you break the hinge of a door that was only ever designed to open outward. The fact that the picture the Lord paints for us of transcendent sexual beauty and goodness is extremely explicit, in extremely explicit ways, does not appear to include anal sex in particular, and I did try. This should not be missed here. That's not nothing. Be careful how you wield your freedoms in this broken world. Nonetheless, you are still free as married couples to do as you wish, and there are some interesting suggestions out there being made regarding the correlation of female tissues to male, one being that perhaps the reason that prostate play can result in climax in men is that tissue development for that particular organ correlates to part of the clitoral matrix. I don't know what to tell you there because the suggestions are too new to make a call. That being said, there are things that are forbidden to us in their entirety. Couples are not permitted to invite a third party into sexual union. It does not matter in the slightest whether or not it is consensual. In Christianity, there is no such thing as a free pass or a cheap pass or a hall pass or whatever the kids are calling it these days. You are not permitted to swap or share your spouse. That means you're not permitted to swing, and orgies are also out. You are not permitted to engage with animals sexually in any way, shape, or form. And this is a big one for our area of the country, given it has some of the highest bestiality rates, seeing as our statutes against these things were only placed on the books in 2015. That means gerbilizing is out of the question. Not only, it's okay, you can Urban Dictionary all this stuff later. Not only is it outrageously dangerous, I'm proud of that. What? Not only is it outrageously dangerous, but it's also absurdly cruel and an inversion of the stewardship command we have all been given to take care of the Lord's creatures. You may not do these things and call them exercising Christian liberty. No exceptions. But what we can do is learn. We can study ourselves, and we can utilize wonderful technologies to help us emphasize and heighten the sexual experience when we find ourselves physiologically damaged or unable to perform in the bedroom the way we once did when we were younger, which is why an ability to navigate the vulva is a wonderful endeavor. There are multiple points that all do different things, It's my highest recommendation that if you are a possessor of a vulva, that you practice isolating these points so that you can become aware of that potential. I have a model up here I can show you. It is also important that you do this so that you can identify when something is wrong or painful. Too long do women in our community spend racked by grief and anxiety because they don't know what to do or how to feel or where the boundaries are. I would very much like that to end in our community. There are too many things that we can fix now. Sex should be fun and not scary. For example, ladies who have carried a pregnancy for any length of time will know that the muscles responsible for doing that are never the same. Trampolines are not fun anymore. Kegels are a very important part of reproductive health, but those muscles are also the ones that during the process of building an orgasm literally massage the penis, involuntarily pulling it deeper inside of you and making it more fun for your spouse. This means that you can work them out and isolate those muscle groups both for overall function and also for precision should you desire to have a better control over that massage process. For example, mapping the weakest and strongest points of your body here has never been easier. If you're in my office for very long discussing these things, you will know that this is one of my highest recommendations. This is called a PeriFit. It is a pelvic floor coach that is a highly sensitive gaming joystick that registers differing pressures as you squeeze your pelvic floor muscles around it, and it links via Bluetooth to a gaming app on your phone. Each game is custom designed for whatever you wish to accomplish with your personal training. It's on Amazon, I don't mind if you look it up right now. Whether it be to strengthen a weakened portion of your pelvic floor, to increase your confidence for your wedding night, or to surprise your spouse with a very specific workout. This is wonderful. Get creative, have fun, be careful using it in public because folks are going to be really confused how you're controlling that game. And at the very least, perhaps I just made Christmas shopping for your spouses a little bit easier. You're welcome. I don't want to hear I don't know what to get her for Mother's Day anymore. And before you feel left out, gentlemen, I want to make it very clear to you that I am more than happy to use whatever analogies you're most comfortable with to teach you these things as well. Whatever language makes the most sense to you is perfectly okay with me. Paul says we teachers are to become all things to all men for the sake of biblical clarity. I am prepared to do that. Moving on. It took me a while to make that. Moving on, we still have more ground to cover. Thank you, I appreciate that. You'll have noticed that there was an odd reference to sheep as well as a strange self-description as dark but beautiful while the beloved is making her opening assessment of what is happening to her. Some translations, like the older translations, will say black but beautiful. And that is not a racist remark, but rather the woman claiming that she is upset that her work outside has caused tanning in unwanted places. What's fantastic about this reference is that she is reminding her lover that she has kept herself pure for him. And not just pure in a transcendent sense. We're talking in the most practical sense there is. She is prepared with a knowledge of bodily hygiene because that reference is definitely about chastity, but even more interestingly, a lot of translators are pointing out that that specific reference there is probably to lice or an overall willingness to address what happens when you neglect sexual hygiene. What is more is that she also gives her lover the key to her personal assessment about herself. She's insecure about the fact that she has the appearance not of a highborn princess who would have a lighter complexion due to being inside all the time and safe from the sun, but rather as an average shepherd girl and vineyard keeper. And she's worried that her outward and low-born appearance makes her less sexy, which means we need to talk about venereal diseases, genital cleanliness, body chemistry, and bodily insecurities before we finish tonight. We live in a fallen world. Our bodies make smells that are unpleasant. Our genitals are no exception. We all know this. If you don't know what you smell like, take your respective undergarments off after a long day of wearing them, place them in a Ziploc bag, seal it, and walk away for about an hour. Once your nose is acclimated to the smells of a new environment, revisit that Ziploc bag and proceed to open it while simultaneously inhaling deeply. That smell, loved ones, is your smell. The bacterial flora that is specific to you. And what is very interesting about this microbiome that lives between your legs is that you control it. The type of soap you use, what you eat, how stressed you are at work, all of it changes what lives there and therefore the way you smell. During the initial stages of arousal, blood rushes to those areas and the temperature of that area increases. And sex pheromones heighten that smell even further, which means if you're not being hygienic, then sex with you from a smell perspective is taking whatever you just experienced in that Ziploc bag and then heating it up and turning on a fan to spread it around further. If that thought isn't a pleasant one, it probably isn't a pleasant one for your spouse. This means that a knowledge of how to control these things makes your nether regions either a pleasing or a displeasing environment to explore. And if sex is always a giving action, then making certain your areas are healthy and inviting is important. To the ancients, this was critical. Perfuming, and I'm using that term in a very specific context here, perfuming was a strict science. The opening to the book of Esther, for example, documents the strategic and deliberate act of altering one's bodily chemistry for prolonged periods of time in order to be as sexually consumable as possible. For a year prior to meeting the Persian king for a single night with him, deciding if you were as luxurious in bed as he desired, future concubines were subjected to a chemical overhaul so that their mucosa would carry the expected preferences the king would consider worthy of his divine status as ruler. That's why Esther goes through all of that. What we consume changes the chemistry of our bodily secretions. This is most evident in the dramatic way your urine smells after eating asparagus. It's also the reason that guy you work with smells distinctly of Tabasco sauce every time he breaks a sweat. The types of things we consume changes how we smell. And if this isn't already immensely important for us to understand for our purposes this evening, there's yet another thing it affects: the way we taste. The point is, as far as this issue is concerned, the sky is the limit here, it would seem. This is entirely up to you and your spouse. Your rule of thumb, if you wish to experiment with this, is to cut back on hyper-olfactory negatives. Caffeine can make you taste sharp. Using tobacco products will make you taste like an ashtray. The same is true of high levels of alcohol. We all know it. Other documented sources of flavor include spicy substances, wheatgrass, garlic and onion, dairy, and diets high in red meat. Sweetening agents are more anecdotal evidence than hard science here, but since fructose and glucose is a part of the content of semen in particular, skewing these numbers does appear to be possible, and there are ample reports that this is true. The rule of thumb on this side of the spectrum is that fruit is your friend, and in particular, stone fruits like dates, peaches, plums, and nectarines. It's not an accident that the fruits that are referenced in this book are there. So too with acidic fruits like cranberries, lemons, and pineapple. The point, though, is that you have to do this chronically. It's not an instantaneous thing. So the next time you consider engaging in a diet, perhaps keep these things in mind. For certain, these are the things that both smell and taste bad on a multitude of levels would be venereal diseases. These are sexually transmitted diseases in all of their forms. Moms and dads, if there is anything I couldn't recommend higher for teaching why sex before marriage is flat out dangerous, it would be STD rates in our country combined with just how many of them have no known cure. This is the one place where Google Images with Safe Search off is what I recommend for prepubescent curiosity, especially when you teach them that all of these diseases can be passed orally, which means a deep makeout session with the wrong person nowadays can lead to a lifetime of pain. And while we're here, I'm going to camp out for a moment to address those of us who find ourselves racked with a disease we did not author in ourselves, either through rape or infidelity. We find ourselves listening to this part of the talk and wondering if we'll ever feel attractive or worthwhile to be with intimately ever again. And the answer is, what has happened to you is inexcusable, pure tragedy. And if you talk to me about it, I will be very unprofessional and weep with you in my office. But once that's over, I will show you all of the incredible technologies we have for dealing with this stuff. Your life is not over, and we have made great strides on this subject. And it's getting better. Come talk to me. But as far as general knowledge about venereal diseases, we just need to teach our children the reality of the world outside of our homes. At any rate, it's clear from the text that our characters are thrilled with each other's smells and tastes, which is important for us to remember as we who are married begin enjoying the comforts of long-term relationships and sexual regularity. Do a self-check of whether or not your hygiene has slipped. If perhaps you're investigating a potential problem, it's a good place to start. And perhaps instead of turning to Pornhub for some novelty, try some strategically placed myrrh oil and ask your spouse to join you in the shower instead. There is so much more we could cover, like the fact that this book documents the lover's response to his beloved's insecurity. Look, if they get to make up a translation, so do I. It's not out yet. I'm just helping. I'm helping. There is more we could cover, like the fact that the book documents the lover's response to his beloved's insecurity with an adorable inability to form a complete thought, coupled with telling her functionally that he has absolutely no idea what she's talking about since she's the most incredibly beautiful woman God has ever created. It's so cute. It's my favorite part of the Bible. He can't, it's literally, she's poetic, and then it's incoherent, and then it moves on. Or the fact that we only made it 2 chapters in, and they haven't even actually had sex yet. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I'll leave you with a reminder of where we began this discussion. The marriage bed is a sacred space that is intended to be private and the exclusive abode of the groom and his bride. In the same way that the Holy of Holies was a place where one was only to tread with very great solemnity, awe, respect, and the highest exclusivity, so too is how we are to treat our relations with our spouses. In a world with an increasingly cavalier attitude towards sexual function, we must employ the same wisdom our Father in heaven has employed with us in this regard. He sets the boundaries and the freedoms for what he has designed for our good. At the same time, it is our sacred privilege as his creation for him to delight in showing us in detailed measure through his scriptures precisely what he means by delight. And in this way, he has allowed us to peer for a moment into a framework of pure human delight so that we can compare what is there to the intentions of our hearts in our own bedrooms. My wish for you when you leave me this evening, just in case you all stare silently at me because no one dares ask a question, which has happened before, is that you leave here either intending to embody the beloved or the lover for the sake of your spouse, or that you intend to study the beloved or the lover for the sake of your future spouse. Either way, such an endeavor requires more Bible study, which is, after all, always my agenda on nights like this anyway. In America, we say of our lovers, they stole my heart. And there's a Mesopotamian equivalent for this that I would very much like to teach you because it's the only context in which you will ever hear me utter these words in promotion of what they teach. Instead of they stole my heart, they say, they have deprived me of my reason. It is my wish for our community that we endeavor to mature and grow in our sanctification process to learn both how to reason and also deprive others of reason when and where appropriate. With that, we'll open up for Q&A. Everybody okay? Okay. Just making sure. Somebody ask a theology question quick. The mics are here and here. If you want to smell myrrh oil, I brought it. I have all my stuff from my office if you have questions about books or you want more information.
Okay, this is a little weird.
Bless you.
What about oral? Like, because some people consider that losing your virginity, others don't. So what are your stances on that?
As far as I can tell, it's based on intention. So if you're already to the point of having oral sex, the question is, why aren't you married to this person? Like we've already broken the expectation here, which is don't arouse this stuff until you're married and you're ready. So the intention of both parties there is sin. Is oral sex a sin? No, it is not. Is the intention of both parties in that category, at the category I assume you're talking about, sin? Yes. Should they continue? No. Does it make sense? Okay. Yeah. Boom. I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Okay, And is there anywhere in the Bible where it talks about the orgies that, like the Romans and Egyptians used to have?
Roman orgies, I think there's one reference in the New Testament to the fact that it's forbidden. But it's like in passing, and I don't remember where it is. Somebody might have to look that up. I don't remember, but it is a weird word that carries the effect of orgies in particular. So yes, I remember there being one. I do not remember where it is. Yeah. A lot of that's the hermeneutic circle stuff. You look into the context of a lot what was going on, like what Paul is addressing in Corinth, for example, and he addresses a lot of that stuff. That's, in fact, that's where I would start looking to figure it out as I'd go to Corinthians, because Corinth was a mess. Yeah. It's okay.
So you showed us that amazing Mother's Day gift.
Yes.
There are other things like that. Are those things allowed?
Oh, totally. Inanimate objects, go to town. Be nice to yourself. Don't cause any pain, so long as it's consensual and it's giving. That's what it's supposed to be, consensual and giving oriented. Yeah, inanimate objects, no problem. They can buzz and do things and light up all you want. Yeah. And in fact, there's a whole website that's devoted to, that I could show you, there's an interactive map for people that want to see all the different spots and how they work. And it's non-pornographic, which is hard to find. But their whole thing is to sell all the lubricants that are necessary to do that effectively and what people need based on their different allergies and stuff. It's fantastic. Yep.
I found the orgy in the Bible.
Yes. My Bible translator's like, I'm on it.
It's like three passages. It's Romans 13. The word is komos. And
Thank
it's
you.
Romans 13 and Galatians 5 and 1 Peter 3.
So not in Corinthians. See, I would have already led you astray. Thank you, Bible translator. You know that Josh is studying to be a Bible translator? Yes. Hooray! Very much so. I'm sure he liked my Passion Translation slide very much. We can do this together. Asking for a friend.
So Jesus compares lust to adultery, and some people take that as a one-to-one correlation. So, and also, we have adultery as the clearest grounds for divorce. What do you say to folks who see that as a one-to-one ratio? If my spouse is lustful, if my spouse is looking at pornography, that is one and the same as adultery, and therefore divorce.
I have to go, that's a great question. So I go on a case-by-case basis because it matters, like, what is he lusting after? Does he have a pornography addiction? Because that's, to me, that's different than him scoping out every girl that walks by type scenario, or a specific person that he's got a flame still lit for, that he's still pursuing and she knows it, things like that. Like, the quality is there. But as far as I can tell for lust, the critical component that you have to look at is the inability. He's doing it for selfish reasons, and he's doing it chronically, and he's unrepentant. That's a big deal. Can I make a case for divorce with those parameters? I can make a case. I can do that. Do I see that being done on a scriptural level through time? I don't. So again, it's contingent on what's happening. It's contingent on all the details. So a blanket statement, I don't know how to do besides assessing what they mean by lust specifically, assessing what they mean by, does that are they wanting out, for example? Like, are they using this as an excuse? That kind of stuff. All that stuff matters a lot. And we never want to use marriage and our jobs as a leader in the church to become like a legalistic judge of their marriage, because that's not our place. We're trying to help them navigate winsomely, not saying to each spouse, you can't do this or you can do this. So those details matter, because that's where we determine where sin is. I'm sorry, I know that's very hairy and sticky. And
Well, it's a hairy problem. So
Yes.
There's multiple factors
Yeah.
to consider.
Yeah.
So for those who are perhaps considering that and that alone, and that
Yeah.
is then the end of the conversation, we would say that would not be the end of the conversation.
I
There's
wouldn't say
more
that's the end of,
conversation to be had.
well, for sure, because the Lord hates divorce. that this isn't, it's not a formula, right? And some of the most beautiful marriages I've ever seen is the man goes and actually commits adultery, and he repents. He and she believes him, and she stays with him, and she shows him Christ. There is no sin that is apart from forgiveness, and she walks it out. It's incredible. I'm always I weep openly in cases like that. Okay. Question from our online crew.
Question from Eden Ross. What about sexological body work? Is this a form of exploration when you may need help? Like for women with, I don't know that I can say this word, help?
We're talking like Prince Albert piercings?
How do you say this? Vaginesimus, which I don't even know what that is.
But the point is they're asking if they're putting piercings places and putting implants places to help aid in that process.
Yeah.
So speed bumps and Prince Alberts.
Yeah, so like.
Yeah, I gotcha. I knew a man that referred to Prince Albert piercings as, what did he call them? Training wheels. That's where I went in my mind as physical therapy. I don't have a part of the Bible that says you can't do that. You might be able to make a case with the mutilation of the body, but I don't, as far as freedoms, like intention would really matter in answering that question, because there can be incredible therapy that this lovely lady back here has referenced, that actually help people who can't do things physiologically that would be considered normal, and it helps incredibly. So I would, again, those details I would say matter, and I would err more on the liberty side of things than on saying that this is wrong. But as a clinician, anything that involves cutting off healthy tissue, I'm not a fan of. It's immediately suspect. And then mutilating, all the things where they're cutting their tongues in places and stuff, I can't get behind removing the actual design function of the muscle. So it's like it went too far. So I hope that answers the question, but the details of each one of those would matter to me.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Caroline? Okay.
Thank you, Anna, for handling this topic, the sensitive topic,
You're welcome.
To the glory of God, because it is His arena.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, though, that we live in such a sex-saturated world and not healthy sexuality.
Right.
And I give some grace to those who are hesitant about talking about it, particularly in mixed audiences, because of, I'll read the scripture which you're familiar with, but it says, "But among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality."
Mm-hmm.
That's not an argument for avoiding the topic,
Mm-hmm.
but or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people.
Right.
Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which is out of place, but rather thanksgiving.
Right.
So the way you've handled it today, I kudos to that. I just wonder how, what you would further do, and when you're any input about how we can discuss this topic, particularly with our children or with our youth, maybe in women's groups. I would have preferred women and men to be separated, but particularly because we're so informed by porn.
Mm-hmm.
And that porn, even if you're not engaged in viewing it, you can't avoid it. You see how
Mm-hmm.
people are objectified just going through the grocery line,
Mm-hmm.
on everywhere. We're
Mhm.
so used to that as the norm that to regard one another through the eyes of Christ as image bearers and to love one another out of a pure heart as brothers and sisters really takes the work of the Spirit in our hearts.
Yeah. So how do we talk about it?
How do we talk about it, and how would you further just encourage that road to health when we live in the environment that we do?
I think one of the ways this can happen in a lot of different ways, but I've found that transparency is better. So obviously we don't want to broadcast in any way, shape, or form what happens in our sex lives. We don't want to broadcast that information. But when you have a member of your church body who is struggling and comes to you for help, giving yourself permission to be vulnerable with them so that they can see that they are not alone, that the prison that they're making for themselves is not actually just them in the cell, it's everybody, and you can get out of it, and all those things, just being willing to talk about it as opposed to being like, oh, let's find somebody else to do this. Like just being comfortable talking about sex in general is huge. And this is really big for our teenagers because they need us to do the talking, and they need us to not allow them to go, I already know. This is really uncomfortable, mom and dad. And you're like, oh, I'm already uncomfortable too. Cool, you know? Great, let's move on. Like, do not do that. Sit down. Song of Songs. Bible study. This is oral sex. You know how oral sex works? Do mom and dad know how oral sex works? Make them really uncomfortable. We have to do that work because you want your voice in their head and not their friends when they're assessing the real world. And they are already assessing the real world, and they've probably already been exposed to pornography. So I'm going to go here, and then I'll go back there. Thank you. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Perfect segue. So one of the first slides that you put up with 97% of the boys being affected by pornography.
Yep. Fifth grade.
83% do what?
Fifth grade is the normal introduction, is the average introduction.
83% of the girls. So I guess mine is more, I'm thinking what a tragedy, and I'm wondering, we're talking about the rewiring of their minds, and I'm just, I just want to call you to task and say, could you come to all of us and teach us? Because this is a play. It's a plot upon society, and I'm wondering if you can teach us to help rewire these folks who are suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want that?
Absolutely. You guys want that? Yeah.
Okay, so if I put together a night where I just teach parents who want to deal with kids who have seen pornography?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just parents, because so Brittany and I have worked for years with other couples, helping them put their marriages back together.
Okay.
This is monumental for them as well.
Yeah, because there really is a way to treat this.
Yeah.
Sure, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Pornography addiction night, put it on the calendar. Noted. All right, back there.
Okay, so I finally figured out what the heck I was talking about. So I still can't pronounce it. It's the body's automatic reaction to the fear of some or all types of vaginal penetration. So what she's asking is, what about therapies where they're helping to ease that fear? And it's like strictly clinical, not like a third-party affair.
Yeah. So if you're married and you have a spouse that's with that, then you want to take it really slowly, and you want to only do, focus on the vulva, no penetration at all, so that they learn to trust you and they know that you're not going to surprise them. That's very, very important, and then you can move on past that. If she's asking about herself, how she can treat herself just in general, or help a friend, whatever it is, get in a bathtub if they like bathtubs. Very, 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 very comfortable. If you can drink something that you like, that's calming, try to be by yourself, make it as peaceful and least anxiety as humanly possible, and then start practicing self-touch. Get as close to whatever you can as possible, and when you get to the point where the anxiety starts building, stop and stay there and keep touching yourself. Because what you're doing is doing exposure therapy, almost like a phobic reaction. That's how you treat all phobias, is with exposure, and you get to learn. And then you repeat that. You go all the way until you feel anxiety, stop and stay there, and just stay in the anxiety for a minute. And slowly, over time, as you do this over and over and over again, you will be able to move up and move up and move up to the point where it's just you. You know that you're safe. You're never going to do anything that's going to hurt you. You can get to a point where that phobic reaction is treated. Very common, very easy to treat.
Got it.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay. It's the same thing with elevators, by the way, and spiders, and everything else. You start with a picture of whatever you're afraid of on your phone, so that every time you turn your phone, you have to see it, and you get used to it. because it's just on your phone and you want to get everything, and you all of a sudden you can handle it, and then you move to a real spider, for example, or a real elevator. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, and my question would be this. There's lots and lots of books on sex. Okay, one being The Joy of Sex. Okay, when I was younger, that's what I read.
Okay.
Lots of pictures.
Okay.
Okay. So my question is, how do you separate pornography from books like The Joy of Sex?
Yeah. So,
Okay, to
good
make
question.
It, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah. Good question. Good question. So, intention primarily. Pornography is designed to make you addicted. It's designed just like gambling machines are designed to elicit addiction. That's what they're there for. That is the intention. Very different than going to an art museum, for example, where there is lots of naked people. That was not intended for that purpose. And the way you can tell when something's damaging and versus something that is beautiful is that, for example, you don't see marriages being broken up because the man has spent too much time in the art museum. Practically speaking. Same thing with medical textbook type stuff. Things that you're teaching for the purpose of sex therapy, which is what that book was developed for. It's the intention. Yeah, same thing with like medical textbooks. And now I've avoided using medical stuff. You notice everything was very abstract and clip arty. You know, I did that on purpose because I didn't want anybody to be uncomfortable, and I didn't know how many kids were going to be in here or if there would be. But that's not pornographic, I would say. It's medical. I realize that line could be blurred in the future, though, so we'll have to take that one step at a time. Back there. Was there an online question? No?
I was stretching, sorry.
Oh. You gotta be careful in here tonight. You gotta be careful.
So I'm a mental health provider, so I feel obligated to ask this question.
Okay.
Because I get this a lot, I guess, and ponder it. We've talked about the idea that masturbation sometimes feels taboo, but it's not technically in and of itself bad. But with pornography, it certainly is in a different category.
Yes.
I get a question that kind of goes something like this. If it doesn't appear to be creating issues in a marriage, leading to affairs, creating any kind of unhealthy issues, is it ever open?
You may have to uncover it. Yeah, there you go.
Thanks for going that with me. Yeah. Is it ever okay for porn as a Christian?
Yeah, like when spouses are like, no, we're both into it, we're together with it, it's totally fine, or this isn't bothering my spouse and nothing bad is coming of it, and so I'm going to use it, that sort of thing. Basically, yeah. I don't think that exists, is what I would say. I would say I totally get it, but I don't understand why you're under the impression that eroding your prefrontal cortex is a good idea for your spouse. That's where I would go probably with that. What do you mean by it's not doing anything? You know, because our responsibility, are they Christians? That would matter too, like, right? Because it's different if you're talking to a Christian, because you're feeding something that is breaking down marriages everywhere. There's also, I would say I don't buy it. I don't buy it. But I get the sentiment because I have seen many cases where she goes, I don't care in the slightest, totally fine, not a problem. But yeah, I would just go, nope, you still are, the vow you made to her, you actually made to God on her behalf. And he says nobody else, which means nobody else on here or in here or anywhere else. Fair enough? All right.
So I have kids, lots of different ages, from kindergarten up to college, and one's actually married. And my question is for like kids like in middle school and high school that know that their friends are watching porn, and how do you like broach your friends of like, that's killing your prefrontal cortex, you probably shouldn't do that? Like, is there a conversation you should have with those friends, or just like...
Ooh, If they bring it up, I wouldn't step into the parenting framework on behalf of parents who may or may not be doing that. Is that what you mean?
I mean the kids, like the kids, like if they're looking at like at school, because all the kids have laptops at school now, and they're looking at their laptops in class.
Yeah.
And, like, all kinds of stuff.
Go scare them.
As kids, do you broach the
Do you need
conversation?
pictures of a decaying prefrontal cortex? Because I can provide those. Yeah, scare the pants off of them. This is real. And they need to see real sin. Because I think part of the problem is they just have no ability to even process. Because our world is incredible. The society we've built is incredible. They don't see sin, really. The real awful stuff. They start dabbling, and then it kind of sits there, and the enemy has a field day with all these little things. But they don't, just absolutely just open up a laptop and be like, prefrontal cortex, this is what you're doing. Having fun? Is this sexy to you? You think the girls are going to really like this later? All that stuff, just hit them with reality. That is my highest recommendation.
Thanks.
All right. Back there.
We have a question from Philip Clay. Is asking a spouse that is unable to have sex to help you out wrong or sinful?
Is asking a spouse who cannot have sex wrong or sinful? So it would depend on the intention. So if you're looking to gratify yourself at your spouse's hand, that is self-centered. Sex is supposed to be oriented to the other person, always. So even if they do oblige you, which is very kind, and sometimes that happens, that would be something that would wear after a while. Sin always wears down. So that treating your spouse as though they're the same as a paper towel or a sock or whatever else will wear on them, regardless of how nice they are. So I would keep that in mind. My question, if this couple came into my office, would be more along the lines of, what's going on such that your spouse already doesn't want to do that? And we would be investigating why it's not a voluntary thing, that the spouse isn't going, yeah, let's make sure you're taken care of, because there's probably something else going on, and we should address that something else first, because it's a priority. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, Phil. Thank you for that question. It's wonderful.
If it does not make sense.
Okay, cool. This is cool. We're streaming, and there's a chat room, and I don't have to worry about it. Okay.
Hi. So growing up, I just always was under the impression that sex in and of itself is just sinful. And that's not my parents' fault. I guess it's just what I absorbed from the world around me. So for a long time, I was really scared of it.
Perfect. Keep talking loudly. I'm sorry.
Yes. So I was just really scared of it, and going through puberty and experiencing some of that desire start to come up, I was just scared of it, and basically I was just worried about the line between desire and lust. Where is that boundary?
Go. The impossible question. It's okay, I prepared for this one because I knew it would happen. So the question is, it appears to be only in here, between you and God, and has to do with your intention, right? Yes. So the difference between lust and desire, the line is there, and has to do with the why something is happening. So if you're dealing with any type of sexual objectification of another human being, in that process, probably lust. If you have some amalgamation of nothingness that is also really pleasant that you imagine is probably your future spouse, you're probably okay. But we'd have to dole out those details if you desired to, because those details matter and really do it happens inside of your head, and it's between you and God. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Question.
I actually have a question this time.
Go for it.
Through the grapevine, I heard that kinks can be genetic.
Whoa. Say that again?
I heard through the grapevine that kinks can be genetic. Is this true? Is this just some baloney? What are your thoughts?
Where I don't see why that wouldn't be true. Kinks, so weird, usually weird, but sexual preferences that are you're where did that come from? I'm not sure why I'm turned on by that particular thing. she was asking if they can ever be genetic. I don't see why not. Epigenetics works that way with everything else, so why sexual preferences wouldn't be there, I don't know. I can't see inside of a brain to see that particular marker, but I don't see why it wouldn't be a possibility. I can definitely see how pornography usage could be inherited and completely wreck generationally. I could totally see. I don't see why the other things wouldn't be there too. I don't see why not. I don't know enough to tell you.
Thank you.
Yes. We're going to talk, wait, say that again? Cannabis, that's next month. You have to wait. You have to wait. We did sex is tonight, drugs is next month, rock and roll is after that. Delta 8 is legal in Tennessee. Please do not do that before my talk, although the questions will probably be very interesting. All right, it's late. I'm going to call it so that everybody can get home. And because it sounds like the rain let up for just a second. It's a very great privilege to serve you in this way. Come talk to me if you need it. If you want more details on books, if you want to smell myrrh, if you want to take a look at what we do in office, I'm more than happy to help you. I love you all. Good night.